63 applicants stood in the glass lobby of the Nexara building, broad, polished, every one of them dressed in black. Then the door turned, and Dominic Shaw walked in. Wrinkled shirt. Von Gumpe. Behind him, a 6-year-old girl clutching a white stuffed rabbit. The laughter came immediately. Someone said it looked like a preschool drop-off. Dominic didn't turn around. He set his daughter down, smoothed her hair once, and walked onto the floor. 30 seconds later, Logan Cross, 253 pounds of regional MMA champion, was face down on the mat. Nobody laughed after that. Not even Jazelle Park, who had stepped close enough to see everything, her heart moving faster than she was prepared to admit. The man they mocked would become the only one standing between her and everything she was about to lose. That Monday morning had started like any other at the Nexara building, 42 floors of blue glass rising above the east side of the city, home to one of the most quietly powerful security technology firms on the eastern seaboard. But the first floor that day had been converted into something else entirely. 63 candidates filled the lobby in 2 long rows, each one carefully selected, each one arriving with the particular posture of a man who believed he was the obvious answer to the question being asked. Former police officers, professional fighters, ex-military contractors, men who had spent years being paid to look dangerous and had become very good at it. The air smelled like ambition and shoe polish. Then the revolving door turned, and Dominic Shaw walked in. Hunter Voss crossed the lobby before the registration clerk could speak. He was 38 years old, thick through the shoulders, with the particular confidence of a man who believed he had already won a competition that hadn't finished. As acting head of security for Nexara Group, Hunter had reasons to be unsettled by today's tryout, and he had chosen to let that unease come out as cruelty. He stopped directly in front of Dominic, close enough to establish the size difference. "This isn't a daycare, friend. The preschool entrance is in the basement." More laughter from the chairs. Logan Cross, sitting in the front row with his arms crossed and one leg stretched out like he owned the floor, gave a slow nod. Logan was 253 pounds of professional MMA fighter who had won 3 regional championships in the last 4 years. He was also the most obvious choice for this position, and he knew it. He had been enjoying the morning. Dominic looked at Hunter directly. His voice carried no heat. "I have an appointment at 9. My name is on your list." Hunter checked the tablet. Something moved across his face, a brief tightening that he covered quickly. The name Dominic Shaw sat at the top of the candidate roster, added late Sunday afternoon, added personally by Jazelle Park, CEO of Nexara Group. Hunter tapped the screen and handed the tablet back to the clerk without explanation. He gestured toward the main hall with a short movement of his chin. Luna was escorted to a small waiting area near the reception desk, where a junior staff member had set up coloring books and a low table. She sat down, placed Pepper on the chair beside her, opened to a blank page, and began to draw without a word. Dominic walked into the main hall. The first round was not about strength. It was about judgment. Each candidate was given 3 minutes at a standing desk, 1 interviewer, a list of situational questions, no time to rehearse. The men ahead of Dominic arrived with laminated credentials, printed service records, framed photographs of themselves with notable clients. One man had brought a folder 12 pages thick. 2 of them opened with the phrase, "I've been doing this for 15 years." Dominic came to the desk with nothing in his hands. The interviewer looked up. "Your CV?" Dominic set a single sheet of white paper on the desk. On it was a phone number and 1 line of text. "Call this number if you need verification." The interviewer studied it. Hunter Voss, standing nearby with his arms folded, let out a short breath through his nose, the sound a person makes when they've decided to be patient in a theatrical way. "You're serious?" Hunter said. "Very," Dominic said. The second part of the first round was a response assessment. Each candidate watched a 90-second video of a simulated threat environment, a crowded event space, multiple actors moving through the frame, a principal figure in the foreground, and had 30 seconds to identify danger points and propose a response protocol. Logan Cross watched the video, paused 2 seconds, then identified 4 of the 6 marked threat positions. He spoke clearly and with authority. The room gave him quiet approval. Dominic watched the video once. He stood with his arms at his sides and said, 6 marked positions. 2 unmarked. The camera dead zone behind column 3 on the left side gives an unobserved approach angle of approximately 4 feet. And the man in the green jacket has shifted his hand position 3 times since the video began. He's carrying something he hasn't decided to use yet. The room was quiet for 2 seconds. Hunter said, "Lucky guess." Dominic said nothing. He returned to his seat. Upstairs on the 38th floor, Jazelle Park was watching the feed from the assessment room on the monitor above her desk. She sat in a straight-backed chair with a notepad on her knee that she had not written on in the last 20 minutes. Her assistant, Madison Cole, stood near the door. "He doesn't look like the usual type," Madison said carefully. "No," Jazelle said. "He doesn't." 3 weeks earlier, an unmarked envelope had arrived on Jazelle's desk. Inside was a 12-page document, a detailed summary of one Dominic Shaw, service record, skill assessment, personal profile. No sender name, no return address. At the bottom of the last page, a single typed sentence. "She will need him." Jazelle had run the sender's number. She had not yet received a name in return. On the monitor, Dominic sat in his chair with the same expression he'd had since walking in. Not bored, not performing patience, simply present. Jazelle tapped her pen once against the notepad. Then she set it down. When the bracket for the physical round was posted on the board in the main hall, the room read it with the focused attention of men who understood what it meant. Most matchups were reasonably balanced. One was not. Hunter Voss had scheduled Dominic Shaw against Logan Cross. It was not an accident. Hunter had arranged the bracket himself that morning, and he had placed the matchup with the particular satisfaction of a man who believed he was solving a problem. If Dominic Shaw, this quiet, unpedigreed, single-father anomaly who had appeared out of nowhere on the CEO's personal list, could be removed cleanly in the first round of the physical assessment, then the whole matter could be resolved before it became inconvenient. Logan Cross read the bracket and smiled. Not a cruel smile. Logan was not cruel by nature. He simply did not see it as a contest. The other candidates drifted toward the outer ring of the mat area. A few pulled out phones. The mood in the room had become something between entertainment and foreplay. They were going to watch the big man erase the puzzle, and then the day would make sense again. Upstairs, Madison leaned close to the monitor and said quietly, "Jazelle, they've put him against Cross." Jazelle was already standing. She straightened her jacket and walked to the door. "You're going down?" Madison asked. "The screen is too small," Jazelle said, and stepped into the corridor. She arrived at the entrance to the training floor without announcement. No advance notice, no escort beyond Madison, who followed 3 steps behind and said nothing. The moment Jazelle appeared in the doorway, the energy in the room changed. The ambient tension of men competing with each other collapsed into a different kind of attention. Spines straightened. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Hunter moved toward her immediately. "Miss Park, there's no need to." "Continue," she said, looking past him toward the mat. She did not look at Logan Cross. She had already assessed Logan. He was what he appeared to be: powerful, experienced, and completely legible. She looked at Dominic. He was crouching near the edge of the mat, retying the lace on his left shoe. He was not looking at Logan. He was not looking at the crowd. He was not looking at her. In the 12 years since Jazelle Park had become the youngest CEO in Nexara's history, she had sat across from hundreds of people who were trying very hard to make an impression on her. Dominic Shaw was the first person in recent memory who appeared to have no idea she was worth impressing, or had simply decided it was irrelevant. That single fact held her attention more than anything else she had seen all morning. Logan Cross rolled his neck, stepped onto the mat, and looked down at Dominic with something approaching generosity. "You sure you don't want to give your spot to the next guy?" A low wave of laughter moved through the room. Dominic finished tying his lace. He stood up. He did not respond to Logan. He did not look at the crowd. He stepped onto the mat and turned to face the center of it with the calm of a man who had already decided what was about to happen and found the decision unremarkable. In the reception area down the hall, Luna had stopped coloring. She was looking through the narrow window in the wall, watching without climbing from her chair. The young staff member beside her glanced between the girl and the mat. "Is your dad strong?" the woman asked. Luna held Pepper a little tighter. "He doesn't lose," she said. "But he never says that himself." The referee raised his hand. The room held its breath. The timer started. Logan Cross came forward immediately, no hesitation, no warm-up feinting. He had ended 4 matches already that morning, all within 40 seconds, all with the same sequence. Close the distance, establish grip, control weight. It had worked perfectly every time. He applied it now with the confidence of a man repeating a proven equation. Dominic moved back, not scrambling one precise step, shifting his weight to the outside edge of his left foot in a way that redirected Logan's approach angle by approximately 6 degrees. It was barely visible. It was also the reason Logan's grip closed on air instead of shoulder. The room didn't understand what had happened. Logan recovered and came again. By the 9th second, Jazelle had stopped breathing at her normal rhythm. She was watching Dominic's eyes. They were not tracking Logan's hands or feet the way a fighter's eyes usually tracked in reactive focus, following motion. They were still. He was reading something deeper, some sequence of information that lived below the level of individual movement. Logan attacked again, a 3rd time. Each time, Dominic gave him something a fraction of an opening, a half step of apparent vulnerability, and each time, the follow-through found nothing there. Jazelle's right hand had found the doorframe at some point, without her noticing. At the 17th second, Dominic's eyes changed, a minor contraction, barely perceptible. He had seen what he needed to see. He had spent 16 seconds not fighting Logan Cross. He had spent 16 seconds learning him. At the 18th second, Dominic stepped in instead of back. What followed happened too quickly for most of the room to track cleanly. One arm controlled Logan's elbow at the joint. The other made a small, decisive adjustment to his center of gravity, not a throw in the traditional sense, but a redirection so precise that Logan's own momentum became the mechanism of his descent. The technique was not MMA. It was not boxing. It was not anything the room could comfortably name. Logan Cross, 253 pounds, 3 regional titles, 4 straight wins that morning, hit the mat face down and did not move. Total time, 27 seconds. No one spoke. Dominic released his hold, stepped back, and stood upright. His breathing was unchanged. He turned his hands over briefly, a mechanical check, nothing more, and stepped off the mat. Hunter Voss was holding a sheet of paper. He did not seem aware that it had fallen from his hand until it made a small sound against the floor. The phones that had been raised to capture what their owners had assumed would be a short, decisive humiliation were still recording. No one had thought to stop them. Luna appeared at the doorway, having slid from her chair the moment she heard silence instead of noise. She crossed the floor to Dominic with the focused urgency of a 6-year-old on a mission. "Dad, are you done?" Dominic crouched down to her level. He looked at her face for a moment with the careful attention he gave to everything. "All done," he said. "Should we go find you some orange juice?" Luna considered this seriously. "With ice?" "With ice," he said. He stood, took her hand, and walked toward the hall exit. Behind him, Logan Cross was being helped to his feet by 2 other candidates who were doing their best to look as though they had expected this outcome. Jazelle Park stood at the door. Her hand dropped from the frame. She turned and walked back toward the elevator without a word. Madison fell into step beside her, and for the length of the corridor, neither of them said anything. Then Madison said, very quietly, "His breathing didn't change." "I know," Jazelle said. She pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. She stepped in, and somewhere between the ground floor and the 38th, she acknowledged to herself as a private and purely operational observation that she had not watched a single other person in that room for the last 7 minutes. She called him up before the bracket finished. The other 62 candidates were still waiting in the main hall when Madison appeared at the door and asked Dominic Shaw to follow her. A few of them exchanged looks. Hunter Voss straightened his jacket and opened his mouth, but Madison had already turned toward the elevator, and Dominic was following, and Luna was beside him, with Pepper tucked under her arm, and none of it had been submitted for approval. The 38th floor was quiet in the way that expensive buildings were quiet, not silent, but deliberately undisturbed. Jazelle's office occupied the northeast corner, with floor-to-ceiling windows that gave the city back in clean rectangular sections. Books were organized by spine color. Her desk held exactly 3 items: a monitor, a notepad, and a glass of water. Nothing decorative, nothing personal. Luna stepped inside, stopped, and looked around with the evaluative focus of a child who took environments seriously. "It's nice in here," she said, "but there aren't any plants." Jazelle, who had been watching Dominic from behind her desk, looked at the girl. A beat passed. "I know," she said. Then she looked back at Dominic, and the conversation about plants ended, though something about it stayed in the room. She slid a folder across the desk. "Sit down." He sat. Luna settled into the chair beside him, opened a small notebook from her coat pocket, and began drawing without being asked to. Jazelle asked about the technique on the mat. He said it came from specific training in specific environments. He did not elaborate. She asked about his service record. He said it was in the folder she'd already reviewed. She asked who had sent her the 12-page document with his name on it. He looked at the folder on her desk. For 2 seconds, something moved behind his eyes, a recognition, a calculation, and then a deliberate settling. "I don't know," he said. She watched him. He was telling the truth. That was the part that bothered her most. "What salary are you asking?" she said finally. He gave her a number. It was reasonable, not suspiciously low, not inflated. It was the number of someone who had thought about what the work was worth, rather than what the market would bear. She signed the contract without renegotiating. Downstairs, Hunter Voss received the news on his phone. He stood in the corridor outside the main hall, looked at the screen for a long moment, and then called a number that did not appear in Nexara's company directory. The call lasted 40 seconds. Afterward, he put his phone in his pocket, smoothed the front of his jacket, and went back inside to conclude the rest of the tryout as though nothing had happened. The first 7 days, Dominic worked like a shadow. He stayed exactly 1 step behind Jazelle, not 2, not beside her. 1 step. The positioning was precise enough that Jazelle noticed it on day 2 and said nothing, because there was nothing to say about it. It was correct. It was how it should be done. He knew which doors were on delayed hinges before he reached them. He read meeting rooms before she entered them, not conspicuously, just a half-second pause at the threshold, eyes moving once across the space. He knew when someone in a room was carrying tension before the conversation revealed it. In 7 years of running Nexara, Jazelle had never had a security detail that she forgot was there because it simply functioned so naturally. She had spent those years finding ways to move around her guards. She did not find herself doing that now. She also noticed that he did not look at her the way people usually looked at her. The particular voltage that occurred when someone was aware they were standing near a CEO, that low-grade performance energy, the slight over-positioning of the body toward power, was absent in him. He was not positioned toward her because she was important. He was positioned toward her because she was his responsibility. The distinction was so unfamiliar that it took her 3 days to name it. On the 5th day, the daycare called at noon. Luna's usual afternoon sitter had a family emergency and could not take her. Dominic came to Jazelle's office door and spoke briefly to Madison. Then Madison came in and told Jazelle what had happened, framing it as a logistical complication that required his absence for the afternoon. Jazelle said, "Bring her here." Madison paused. Jazelle had already turned back to her screen. Luna arrived 45 minutes later with her backpack and her coloring kit. She said hello to Jazelle, put Pepper on the corner of the waiting room couch, and sat down with her supplies and worked quietly for the entirety of the afternoon without interruption. At 4:30, she walked to Jazelle's open office door and held out a folded piece of paper. Jazelle opened it. It was a drawing in crayon, 3 figures in front of a house. 1 tall figure with dark lines for a jacket, 1 figure with long hair and a gray dress, 1 small figure holding something white and round, which was presumably Pepper. In front of the house, there was a tree with green leaves and what appeared to be apples or possibly ornaments. The sky was yellow. Jazelle looked at it for a long time. She folded it carefully and opened the top left drawer of her desk and placed it inside. She did not put it in the recycling bin under the desk, which is where paper without operational relevance went. That evening, Jazelle received an email from an anonymous address. The message was 9 words. "You're being sold, and you don't know it yet." Attached was a screenshot of a clause from a contract she had signed 6 months earlier, a merger framework agreement with Vantage Tech, led by Isaac Crane. The clause had a small section marker at the bottom. Section 9. She called her legal team. Her primary contract attorney did not pick up. His assistant called back 40 minutes later with an explanation that felt carefully constructed. Jazelle sat at her desk after the call and looked at the framed mission statement on the wall across from her without seeing it. Dominic was standing near the window. He had been there since she finished the call. She said, "Do you know anything about this?" He said, "Not enough yet, but I'm looking." The dinner with Isaac Crane was arranged for Thursday evening at a restaurant on the 40th floor of the Meridian Hotel, the kind of place where the lighting was designed to make powerful people look comfortable. Crane was 62 years old. He had the polished benevolence of men who had learned that appearing harmless was a more effective strategy than appearing strong. He stood when Jazelle arrived, expressed genuine-sounding pleasure, and ordered a bottle of wine from a list that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He acknowledged Dominic with a brief look, the particular look of a man who had just completed an accurate assessment and found it worth noting. The meal moved through its early stages with the performance quality of two skilled negotiators who had agreed to enjoy the theater of the thing. Crane spoke about the Vantage partnership with warmth. He used words like synergy and family without embarrassment. He mentioned 3 of Jazelle's initiatives by name in ways that showed he had done his research. Then, during the main course, he said the words as though they were not loaded. The Q4 benchmarks, of course, will be the natural moment of alignment, given Section 9. Jazelle set down her fork with the careful motion of someone who does not permit their hands to express what their face will not. Inside, something dropped and kept falling. She said, "Of course." Crane smiled with the warmth of a man who believed he had already won. "I want to be clear, Jazelle. I'm not an adversary. I'm simply pragmatic." She looked at him. "I appreciate the clarity, Isaac." In the car afterward, the city moved past the windows in streaks of white and amber light. Dominic drove. Neither of them spoke for the first 20 minutes. Then Jazelle said, "Did you read the contract before you took this job?" "First morning," Dominic said. "Section 9, Section 14, and Appendix C." A pause. She looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. "Why would you read my contracts? I can't protect you if I don't understand the ground you're standing on." She watched him in the mirror. He was watching the road. His jaw had a line of tension in it that had not been there during dinner, which meant he had been performing calm in that restaurant the way she had, and she had not noticed until now. That realization settled into her chest and stayed there. 3 nights later, the security log for the Nexara basement parking level showed an 11-minute gap. No footage. No error code explaining the gap, just the gap itself, which was technically impossible under the current system unless the gap had been created by someone who understood the system well enough to edit it. Dominic found it during his standard end-of-day review. He did not report it immediately. He made a copy of the log, closed the original, and sat for a long time in the security office on the 2nd floor, looking at the 11-minute window. He had spent 4 years in a Delta Force unit that specialized in identifying internal network compromises, situations where the threat was not coming from outside, but from within a trusted structure. He knew what the early architecture of a betrayal looked like. He was looking at it now. Hunter Voss had access to the camera system. Hunter Voss had a phone number in his contacts that did not belong to Nexara, and Hunter Voss had been in the building during those 11 minutes. Dominic closed his laptop and began to build a different kind of record. The conversation about Clare happened on the 12th night. Luna had started coughing around 3 in the afternoon, nothing alarming, but by 6 o'clock she had a low fever and the particular expression of a child who was managing her discomfort with slightly too much determination. Dominic came to Jazelle's office at 6:15 and asked with the economy of words that defined him if he could leave at 7 instead of 8. Jazelle stood up and got her coat. He looked at her. "You don't need to." "I know," she said. His apartment was on the 14th floor of a building 12 blocks north. It was clean and small and contained almost nothing that was not functional except for one corner of the living room, which belonged entirely to Luna. Drawings covered the wall in a dense, overlapping gallery. Books were stacked in bright columns by height. A low basket held an arrangement of stuffed animals in some order that appeared to have its own internal logic. Jazelle sat on the edge of Luna's bed, while Dominic went to make soup in the kitchen. Luna looked up at her from the pillow with the evaluative calm of a 6-year-old who was assessing whether this visitor was going to say something useful. "Do you have a mom?" Luna asked. "Yes," Gisela said. "Is she around?" "She's busy. We don't see each other much." Luna considered this with the seriousness of a judge reviewing new evidence. "My dad is busy too," she said. "But he's always here." Later, after Luna was asleep and the soup bowls had been rinsed, they sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea. The building made its evening sounds. The city pressed its light against the window glass. Jazelle asked about Luna's mother. Dominic was quiet for long enough that she wondered if she had asked something she should not have. Then he turned the cup once in his hands and said that her name was Clare, that she had been killed in a car accident 3 years ago, when Luna was 3, that he had been on a mission when the call came, that he had been on a transport home within 6 hours and out of service within 60 days, and that he had not gone back. He said all of it the way he did most things directly, without ornamentation, without asking for a particular response. Jazelle did not offer sympathy in the standard arrangement of words. She sat with it for a moment and then said, "Is that why you always stay exactly 1 step back?" He looked at her, and for the first time since she had known him, the expression on his face was not the expression of a person doing a job. It was something older and less defended than that. He did not answer. But he did not look away. In the morning, she called the investigator she had retained separately from her legal team, the one no one at Nexara knew about. She gave the investigator the phone number from Dominic's original single sheet of white paper. The result came back within hours. The number belonged to a retired brigadier general named Samuel Holt, who had commanded Dominic's unit during the last 2 years of his service. Holt was the one who had sent the 12-page document. Holt knew about Crayon. Holt had known for longer than she had. Jazelle read the name in the report and sat back in her chair. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then she said to herself, "In the empty office, the only sentence that felt accurate, I've been surrounded, and I didn't see it." The emergency shareholder session arrived on a Tuesday. Isaac Crayon had called it with the formal language of process, a performance review, a routine Q4 evaluation, a conversation about alignment. But Dominic had been tracking the peripheral activity for 11 days by then, and what he saw in the 48 hours before the meeting was not consistent with a routine anything. 2 of the building's service elevators had been accessed after hours by maintenance badges that had not been checked out through the standard system. 3 external visitors had been registered under a consulting firm name that did not appear in Nexara's vendor database. And on Monday evening, the motion sensors on the 38th floor had logged a 6-second anomaly in the eastern corridor, 6 seconds during which they detected presence and then stopped detecting it, which meant they had been overridden rather than fooled. Dominic built the picture piece by piece on the security office screen, and the picture that emerged was this. Someone was planning to access the Nexara central server during the shareholder session when every decision-maker in the company would be in one room, focused on one problem, facing one direction. The server held client data for 900 corporate accounts. In the wrong hands, in the hours before a forced leadership transition, it was worth more than the merger itself. He had 40 minutes. He moved through the building the way he had been trained to move, not running, not conspicuous, but with the particular efficiency of a person who has decided on a route and committed to it entirely. He cleared the lower floors, confirmed the boardroom was secured, placed Madison at Jazelle's side, and went to the 38th floor via the fire stairwell at the back of the building. They were already there. 4 of them, professional and unhurried, moving toward the server room with the confidence of people who had been told the floor would be clear. It was not clear. What followed was not a long fight. Long fights happened when there was uncertainty about the outcome. Dominic had spent 7 years learning to remove uncertainty as quickly as possible, and he applied that knowledge now with a focused economy that left no room for performance or hesitation. The first 2 were controlled and immobilized before the third had finished processing what was happening. The third came at him from the left. He had anticipated the angle from the moment he identified the team's formation, and the fourth, who was the largest and the most dangerous, lasted the longest. 11 seconds. 4 men. Hunter Voss appeared from the eastern corridor with a firearm and the flat expression of a man who had arrived at the part of the plan he had been rehearsing. "I need 15 minutes, Hunter said. "Stand down and nobody gets hurt." Dominic looked at him. His left shoulder had taken a hit during the last exchange. Nothing structural, but it registered. He filed it and moved on. "I don't have 15 minutes, he said. The confrontation was brief. Hunter was skilled and committed, but he was operating on the logic of threat, and Dominic was operating on the logic of necessity, and necessity has a particular advantage in close quarters. When the sound of footsteps on the fire stairs announced the building security team's arrival 2 minutes later, Hunter Voss was seated against the wall with his hands immobilized and a resigned expression that contained, beneath its surface, the specific shame of a man who had bet on the wrong outcome. Downstairs, in the boardroom, Jazelle Park was sitting at the head of the table with 31 shareholders and one Isaac Crane arranged in front of her. She had received the update from Madison 60 seconds earlier through an earpiece. She had absorbed it, processed it, and returned her face to its baseline configuration. Crane had been speaking. She let him finish his sentence. Then she said, "This session will need to be postponed. The reasons will be explained by law enforcement within the next few minutes." She let one beat pass, and then looked at Crane with the direct focus of someone who had finished being diplomatic. Section 9 will also be contested under Clause 22B, which provides for nullification in cases of documented partner fraud. "I have the documentation." Crane sat very still. "I've been building the file," she said, "for 8 days. The hospital was not where Dominic had intended to end his Tuesday. He declined the first ambulance with the same energy he applied to most things he didn't need. Jazelle met him in the lobby of the Nexara building, as the police were completing their initial processing of the scene, looked at his left shoulder and the state of his shirt, and said simply, "I'm driving." He started to say something. She held up her keys. At the emergency intake desk, she gave his name and insurance information. From memory, she had reviewed all personnel files on the weekend following his hiring, a fact she had not mentioned to him. The intake nurse looked at her, and then at Dominic, and then back at her with a diplomatic absence of assumption. In the exam room, while they waited for the attending physician, Jazelle took the gauze from the supply shelf and began to work on the cut on his forearm. She did this without asking permission, which he found notable. "You know how to do this?" he said. "No," she said, "but I learned quickly." He watched her work for a moment and did not say anything further. Luna arrived 35 minutes later in the company of Madison, who had called the sitter and then driven over when the sitter wasn't answering. The girl came through the door with Pepper under one arm and covered the distance between the door and her father's bed in approximately 4 steps. She held his hand for a moment without speaking, which told Dominic more about what she had been feeling on the way over than any words would have. Then Luna looked at Jazelle with the careful assessment she applied to questions that mattered. "Is Miss Park the reason Dad got hurt?" she asked. Dominic said, "No. Dad got hurt because of what his job needed him to do." Luna considered this. The reasoning was acceptable. She turned back to Jazelle, and whatever she found in the woman's face appeared to satisfy some additional question she hadn't spoken aloud. "Can you stay?" Luna asked. "I don't want Dad to be alone when he's hurt." Jazelle looked at Dominic. He was looking at the wall above the bed with the focused attention of someone who had decided to study the paint very carefully. She pulled the chair beside the bed closer to the wall and sat down. "Okay," she said. By 11 at night, the corridor was mostly quiet. Luna was asleep on the waiting room bench along the opposite wall, her head resting on Jazelle's jacket. Pepper fitted into the space between her chin and her chest. Jazelle sat without moving, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the bench near the girl's shoulder. Dominic stood at the doorway of the exam room, cleared for discharge but not yet gone. His shoulder had been properly dressed. He was wearing a clean shirt that Madison had retrieved from his apartment, along with Luna's things. He stood in the doorway and watched the two of them in the yellow corridor light, and did not speak for a long time. Jazelle looked up. Neither of them said anything. The city ran its usual frequencies outside the window at the end of the hall sirens at a distance. The low harmonic of traffic. The anonymous noise of a place that didn't slow down for ordinary emergencies. Dominic walked back in and sat on the edge of the bench on the other side of Luna, so that the girl lay between them with Pepper occupying the logical center. After a while, Jazelle said quietly, Luna added to the drawing. He waited. "The one she gave me last week," she said. "I had it on my desk. She came in this morning before I arrived and added something." "What did she add?" "A tree," Jazelle said. "In front of the house." Dominic was quiet. The corridor light made a low, even sound above them. Luna breathed in the slow, even rhythm of a child who trusted, entirely and without condition, that the world around her was held. For the first time in the entire length of that long and breaking day, for the first time, perhaps, in a good deal longer than that, the corner of Dominic Shaw's mouth moved. It was small. It was quiet. It was, unmistakably, a beginning.